Dead on Your Feet. Arthur Grant Michaels, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 3. Narrator Eric Aust. In memory of Tajana and Andre, with gratitude and respect and love, thanks to the patience and generosity of my friends. Chapter 19. Totentons. Did you forget to invite me? More than the suppressed anger that tinged his voice, it was the sickly smell of rotting fruit that identified Marshal Xander standing behind me. I guess I did, I replied. Sorry. No, you're not, he said. That's twice you've forgotten me. Maybe you'd like to forget me altogether. How could the same sentiment, almost to the word, create such opposite reactions in me? With Rafik, it had intensified my desire to conjoin with Marshal Xander. It caused a revulsion. He said, Is that how you thank me for flying you to London? You're almost as ungrateful as Max was. I didn't see the need, I began weakly. Marshal pushed me into the elevator. Let's go for a ride, he said. The elevator descended noiselessly, but my panic escalated. Here finally was Max Harkey's killer. My blood pulsed so hard that my eyes throbbed with the pressure. My mouth went dry, and I began to see white patches of light dance before me. Breathe, I told myself. Focus on the breath. Take the air in and then let it out. Disregard the reek of his body, one thought at a time. Your lover spoke to me today, he said. He refused my offer. I must say he wasn't very chivalrous about it. Except regarding you. I think he's ready to die for you. It must be nice to be loved by someone that much. Where is Rafik? I said. What have you done? I made a move toward him, but suddenly he brandished a stiletto. I saw his hand squeezing the hilt of the dagger nervously. The slender blade flashed brightly. It was the perfect instrument for slicing into the femoral arteries. Where's your courage now? He said. The elevator stopped and the door slid open. He used the knife to point the way out. After you, he said with mock courtesy. He left the Appleton and walked toward his car. There would be no wind in our hair for this ride. The hardtop was securely attached now. Get in, he said. I did, but I was already imagining myself leaping from the car and fleeing from him. I could surely outrun him. I would sprint all the way to Station D, taking the alleys and footpaths so that he couldn't pursue me in the car. I would scream bloody murder all the way. He would never catch me and I'd be safe. But before he closed the car door, Marshall pulled a heavy chain from around the back of the seat and secured it with a big padlock across my belly. Some chastity belt, I thought. He got in behind the wheel and pulled away. He said, Even if Rafik didn't accept my original offer, I'm sure you both want to see his work performed in opening night, don't you? I didn't answer him. I know you do, he said. And it would be a shame to have the performance canceled, especially after all the time and effort Rafik has spent on it. Did he ever tell you what it's about? I know it was supposed to be a big secret, but I doubt that lovers like you can keep secrets from each other. I stayed mute. It's really touching, he said. Rafik's new ballet was inspired by you. It's all about the most perfect male couple in Boston. It's even got a fancy title. Umo Giocoso, Playful Man. Isn't that sweet? Well, tonight we'll see how far your playful love for each other goes in real life. He said nothing more for the remainder of our short ride, but he did keep the sleek dagger visible at all times. I wondered what he was going to feel like to be slashed with the razor-like edge of that knife. Marshall pulled the car into the underground garage of the Copley Palace and parked it in his reserved space. He got out, then came and opened my door and unchained me from the seat. His private elevator was right near his parking space, yet he felt the need to brandish that slender, glistening blade to me for those few steps. Once inside the wood-paneled chamber, he must have felt safer because as we began our long ascent, he softened his voice and his manner. All I'm asking from you is some companionship tonight. Do you think you can manage that for your lover's sake? I realized at that moment, with myself in mortal danger, that somewhere else in the city of Boston, Rafik was making art with Tony Di Natale and a whole company of dancers, and somewhere else, Nicole was having dinner with Lieutenant Branco, who knew where I was. The unsettling answer was nobody. Once we were inside his suite, Marshal Zandel double-locked the doors. The lights were extremely low, and he dimmed them even more. What might have been a romantic gesture only increased my dread, especially with him wielding that knife. "Would you like a drink?" he said. I didn't answer. He said, "I want to celebrate tonight." He pulled me roughly toward the wet bar and went behind it to make himself a drink, always keeping that naked blade close by. The wall of plate glass behind him opened out onto the balcony, which was still under reconstruction. Behind the railing, the broad cityscape of Boston's lights sparkled invitingly under a clear white sky. I wondered how many other people in that glittering terrain were facing the same kind of danger I was. Marshall half filled a tumbler with scotch and drained it in a few noisy gulps. He refilled it, then took another glass, filled it with ice, and poured some gin into it. "See," he said, pushing the glass of gin toward me. "I remember what you like to drink. Does Rafik do that for you?" I finally spoke. "Rafik mixes me a proper martini." "Is that what you want me to do for you?" "I don't want anything from you. But tonight is an important night. I want you to be happy and comfortable with me. Tonight is when everything turns out the way it's supposed to." He left the 2 bottles of liquor on top of the bar and came around to my side. He offered me a bar stool. "Don't be afraid," he said. I sat down wearily, and he pulled another stool close to me. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want company." He sat down and pressed one of his heavy legs against mine. Fortunately, both his hands were occupied, one hovering over the stiletto and the other holding his drink. "I knew Max for over 20 years, he said, "and for all that time I never thought of hurting him. Not for real. See, I believed if I waited long enough, Max would come home to me. I waited for him, and I deserved him." He clinked his glass heavily against mine. "I want to drink to you and Rafik. The kind of love that works out right. Aren't you going to drink to that?" Faced with the possibility of never seeing my lover again, I thought of Rafik and took a big mouthful of gin. It seemed to help the situation. Marshall asked, "Do you want to hear how Max and I met?" I nodded, even though it was probably the last thing in the world I wanted to hear at that moment. But I was facing a big, nervous beast, a dangerous creature that had been caged and frustrated so long that the slightest snap of a twig might launch it into a killing rampage. Maybe if I appeared to cooperate, I could lull him into calmness. I didn't know what else to do. No one knew where I was. All I had to play with at that moment was time. Perhaps I could stall the inevitable long enough for a Deus Ex Machina to pick my name out of the cosmic bingo basket and rescue me. Marshall began his tale. "I was vacationing in Biarritz in summer. My mother wanted to get me off her back. Do your parents have money?" I suppressed a laugh. Marshall continued, "Well, mine were shits, but they were filthy rich. And I do mean filthy. You can't imagine how much money we had. I still don't know what I'm worth. I've got a full-time staff of accountants and lawyers just to keep track of it all, and they don't even know. But you know what? The money compensates for an awful lot." He gulped at a scotch, then went on. "My folks hated me. They hated everybody. The only thing they loved was their money, and the joke was they acted as if the money was some kind of reward for their superior taste and intellect, when the fact was it all started with my grandfather's deli in the Bronx. The Zander Empire was born in Zadlinsky's deli. That's a good one, huh? Then by some fluke of luck, my grandfather kept expanding the business until he landed up with a chain of supermarkets clear across the country. Marshal Zander raised his glass. "Here's to Grandpa," he said, then noisily drained the contents. He poured himself another drink and went on. "By the time the old geezer died, he had already been busy buying hotels, and here we are in the final result." He spread his arms to encompass the panoramic view of Boston by night. "All mine." He leaned toward me, one hand still grasping that stiletto. "Just give me the word, and it's yours, too." I said, "You were telling me how you met Max." "Max?" He said, "Max! Where's Max?" he shouted. Then he said quietly, "When I quit medical school, Mother was so ashamed she sent me to Biarritz. That's where I met Max. I liked him right from the start, and he liked me too. I don't think it was just my money, but I didn't hide it either. That's the kind of place it is. You throw your money around, so Max and I got friendly and did things together for a while. Go out and stuff like that. God, he looked unbelievable on the beach, and finally one day, I had to tell him how I really felt about him. Marshall sucked down some more scotch as though he needed Dutch courage to confront Max Harkey again. What happened? I asked. Oh, it was awful. Max gave me that look. You know that look. You go out with someone for a while, and then you go to touch them, and they give you that look. Marshall cocked his head and eyed me like an animal that had just sensed a change in its environment. You did that to me, too, he said. Can we stay with Max? I said nervously. Sure, he said. Max, now, you later. He laughed as though he'd made a joke. Then he passed his fat tongue over his lips. All that time, Max was flirting with me, and then suddenly it was, oh no, not that. So I was okay about it. I just went after some of the other guys there. It was easy. You give them money and they love you forever. Marshall gazed into his glass of scotch. Though it wasn't yet empty, he poured more in. He didn't return his free hand to the dagger, but it was still lying on top of the bar, close to him. Shit, he said suddenly. What? You know what he did to me once? One time at dinner, Max started preaching to me about my sex life and how dangerous it was. I had a renter with me that night, and I was kind of insulted, not to mention that the renter must have thought. But then Max started flirting with the guy. Imagine that. I had a paid companion, and Max was going after him. Max, who was supposed to be straight. So I got mad and threw my drink at Max and left the table. Marshall took his head and chuckled as though amused by his own anecdote. Then he continued. I went back there 2 hours later to have a peaceful meal by myself, and damn it if Max wasn't there with that same hustler. They were laughing and having a grand time together. So I went up to Max and demanded an explanation. Max grinned from ear to ear and told me that the young man was a dancer and they were discussing modern choreography. And you know, that's when I really knew I was in love with him. So the next day I gave Max a blank check and told him to start his own ballet company. Did you two ever have sex? Never. Max liked women, plain and simple. We stayed friends, but it was hard for me because I always hoped Max would change his mind. I think that was what linked me to him, the promise of his body, and all I had to do to keep him close was write a check. That was one thing I was good at, and that was exactly what he got from me, the promise of my money. We needed each other for different things, and that was what kept us connected. Now, in spite of Marshall Xander's precarious mental state and my dubious future, I was curious to know what had changed between them, so I asked him what happened. He said, You like this story, huh? You like hearing about Max and me. Had my unchecked curiosity about other people's business finally careened onto its final course? Marshall grinned with satisfaction and continued. After more than 20 years of waiting for Max, of putting up with all his women, married ones, single ones, old and young, after all that time, Max met that dancer in London, and he was never the same. He told me that something had clicked, and I laughed at him, but in fact I saw that something was changed in him. He acted as if he didn't need me anymore. When he came back from London, he told me he was going to marry her. He'd already changed his will to leave most of his estate to her. Mind you, that was everything he acquired because of my help. Maybe all those women he had over the years were painful for me, but at least they were temporary. But marriage and family weren't temporary. He said he didn't need me anymore. I'm sure he still needed you in his own way. No. He was through with me. He wasn't even throwing crumbs anymore. That's why I needed his diary. I had to know how he really felt. Did he really love that girl? Yes, I said, realizing too late that I was purposely provoking him. How do you know? She told me. What does she know? She said anything? I need that diary. That's where the answer is, in Max's own writing. But you already have it, I said. No, I don't. I said, you took it after you killed him. Marshall's face froze. He picked up the stiletto and stared at it. Then he got up off his bar stool and stood facing me. Then with all his strength he screamed, I never killed him! He started toward the center of the room, but he was unsteady from the liquor. He faltered for a second, then caught his balance. Max, he yelled out. Max, I'm sorry. Come back. I promise to be good. Please come back. In his moment of madness, I saw a small hope for my own salvation. While he stood in a daze waiting for Max Harkey to answer him, I surreptitiously lifted the receiver off the nearby telephone. I hoped the concierge downstairs would notice that the phone was off the hook. If he was worth his salt, he would listen in for a while, spy on us, like most people in the service industry, and perhaps he would also hear trouble and come up, and I would be rescued. Marshall caught my slight movement in his peripheral vision. I tried to conceal it by standing up myself. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Just stretching my legs." I moved cautiously away from the bar toward the sofa in the center of the room and said, "Can we sit here for a while?" "You want me to get more comfortable, huh?" "Right," I said. He came and sat next to me on the leather sofa, the exact place where I'd enjoyed my brief romp with Rico. Marshall was toying with the knife now, making its shiny blade glint in the dimness. I realized that what scared me most was his clumsiness with that weapon. Max Harkey had been an easy target because he was unconscious, but I imagined Marshall tripping and hurtling his bulky body at mine in his clumsy gorilla way, flailing to keep his balance and lashing randomly with that finely honed blade. Distance was the key to my survival, that and my quick reflexes. I said, "Can you tell me what happened that night?" He spoke to the knife blade as he recounted his version of the events the evening Max Harkey was killed. "I did go back to his place. There was something important I had to tell Max, and it couldn't wait. The production of the Phoenix could create serious legal problems since the company didn't yet have the performance rights for the work. We were having trouble finding who owned the copyright, if anybody." I said, "But Max had already decided to take the Phoenix off the program." "He never told me that," said Marshall Zander. "He said it to everyone at the party. You knew about the cancellation, so why did you really go back that night?" "It doesn't matter," he said quickly. "It doesn't matter why. The point is I did go back. I had to see Max just one more time alone. I had to talk with him out of marrying that bitch. When I got there, the door was open, so I went in. Rico was nowhere around, and Max was lying at the base of the Brancusi. He was wearing that silk robe I brought him from Hong Kong. It was open and everything was showing, and..." Marshall faltered. I guess I got turned on. Max's legs were still as smooth and muscular as when he was dancing. It's remarkable. His body never seemed to age. I went to him. He was still breathing, and there was no blood. I shook him and spoke to him. All he said to me was, "Get out, you cunt!" Then, when he saw it was me, he laughed. Then he went on again. That's when I dragged him to the piano and hauled him up onto the bench. Why? Because he loved that piano more than anything else he owned. That's where I wanted to have him. His bathrobe slipped open again. God, what a sight! And it was finally all mine. "Don't go on," I said, "please." "But I did," replied Marshall. "I did go on. After 20 years of waiting, I finally got what I wanted from Max Harkey's sacred body. And then, like a spider, you killed him? I told you I did not kill Max. I loved him too much. Killing him would be too common. What I did was sacrifice him. That's how our love finally culminated, in a beautiful sacrifice." "And you knew exactly where to cut him?" "Yes, in those beautiful thighs. The blood pulsed out at first, almost like he was coming again. I used his robe to block and the spouting and make it run down his legs. After a few minutes, it slowed down and finally it stopped. Just like that, I thought. No pain, no panic, just the draining away of life from a body." Marshall said, "But now I want him back. I can't go on without him. Who else can cause me such exquisite pain and frustration? Only my parents, and they're both dead. Even the parasitic hustlers I hire can't be as heartless and cruel as Max was with me. They do it only for the money, and they're lousy actors, but Max and I were the real thing. Just like you and Rafik. We were destined for each other. It began long before I gave him his ballet company. Whatever I did for Max came out of my love for him. Our relationship was not based on money. It was based on passion and sacrifice." Gosh, I thought, that's exactly what I thought my relationship with Rafik was founded on. And at that instant, I promised myself that if I survived this nightmare, I would take each moment with Rafik the way it came, without questions, without analysis, without conditions. I wanted no more passion and sacrifice. If this was where that led, and if I survived tonight, I would also lock away the kitchen knives. Suddenly, the door buzzer sounded. It was my Deus Ex Machina. The conserje. I was saved. Marshall, however, was now keen and alert as a wild animal. What's that? He said. You know never to bother me. He got up to go to the door, and on the way he turned off all the room lights. Then he warned me, don't do anything stupid. I have nothing to lose. It was the conserje at the door. I heard him asking Marshal Zander in his fawning manner if there was any trouble, since his telephone had been left off the hook. My jailer assured the conserje that everything was fine. I'm having some personal therapy, he said. It's been difficult for me since I lost my friend. He was holding the stiletto behind his back. So please leave us alone. Very good, sir, said the conserje. Obsequious bastard, I thought. He was listening to us over the phone. Didn't he hear anything we said? I was about to yell out, he's got a goddamn knife behind his back. But the conserje had departed without further question. Marshal Zander relocked the doors and came back in. The only light still on now was under the bar. He stopped there and poured himself another drink. Then he calmly replaced the telephone receiver in its cradle and then, in one violent twisting sweep of his big body, grabbed the telephone and ripped the connecting cord from the wall. A small table was upset and the lamp on top of it crashed to the floor. Marshal Zander then noticed my cocktail on top of the bar where I'd left it. Aren't you drinking? He said. Don't you want to celebrate my special night? What's so special about it? Marshal Zander grinned at me, but it was the same demented grin that King Kong used on Fay Ray. Tonight is the night I get what I want. I'm so tired of rejection, he said. Everyone says no. Rico refused me too. Is that why you rigged the bikes on the scooter? He was meddling just like you. He already knew too much about me, and he was bound to figure out what had happened. So if I'm going to pay for 2 murders, I have nothing to lose by getting what I want from you, whatever it takes. In a flash, I saw myself unconscious like Max Harkey with Marshal Zander rooting around my crotch. Unconscious was the only state in which I'd be able to tolerate his mouth anywhere on my body. But you don't even like me, I protested. That doesn't matter anymore, said Marshal Zander. I just want to know that I can get what I want, and all I want right now is to hold you. Just to hold you, just for a little while. The city lights outside cast a dim light on us. Marshall twirled the stiletto in his hand, and the blade flashed like a surgeon's scalpel. I said, and after you hold me a little bit, then what? Well, you want to kiss me a little bit too, and then stick your tongue in my mouth a little bit, and rip my clothes off and cut me up and fuck a little bit? No, he said, that's not what I want. Then what do you want? I want Max. I want my Max back. Too late, pal. You killed him. Suddenly, he lunged for me and pressed his big, soft face against mine. He tried to thrust his tongue into my mouth. It was like a warm slug burrowing into me. The smell of his body nauseated me. I pushed him away. He was already breathing hard. He said, that was for the trip to London. Now I want payment for your lover's ballet. Again he thrust his heavy body into mine, and this time pressed me deep into the cushions of the leather sofa. He pinned both my hands behind me, and I felt the blade of the stiletto brush against my wrist. Not the hands, I thought. Not the hands. Why don't you cooperate, he said. Just pretend you like me. Is that so much to ask? In your case, I said, yes. Bondage was no fun when the act was for real. I was being forced into dirty fighting, but then our match was hardly within a gentleman's code of honor. Those yoga stretches would finally come in handy. All that flexibility and range of motion in my strong legs let me coil the muscles up and then release the energy and ram my knee directly into Marshall's groin. He screamed and doubled up. His body sank heavily onto me. I wrestled around underneath him, trying to free myself. At the split second I'd squirmed free of him, I felt something brush against my left butt cheek. I pushed myself off and away from the sofa, but my usual spring wasn't there. Something was wrong. I'll get you, he said. You'll have to catch me first. That's when I felt a warm, wet sensation on my fanny. I put my hand there and it came back sticky. I smelled my fingers. The metallic odor proved I was bleeding. Just as I'd slipped away from him, Marshal Zander had knifed me in the butt. I felt the pain rising fast, almost as though my awareness of the wound was causing it to hurt. Marshal Zander was crouched on the sofa, groaning softly. I got down on the floor and crept away from him. The city lights outside glowed softly through the long walls of plate glass windows. That's when I figured out where I might be safer from him. In the darkness, I crawled on all fours toward the big grand piano, which sat directly in the way of the sliding doors that opened onto the outside balcony. I got onto the piano and pulled against one of the doors, but it wouldn't budge. In the darkness, my fingers fluttered frantically around the door frame to locate the locking device. It was probably some high-tech electronic gizmo controlled from an office, buried somewhere in the belly of the hotel, but no, I found it. One of those simple screw mechanisms. That's exactly when the room lights came up, bright and blazing. "I see you," said Marshal Sander. From under the piano, I saw his big feet lumbering toward me. I untwisted the locking screw on the door as quickly as I could, all the while feeling the seat of my pants getting wetter and warmer with my blood. I knew I was losing it fast. Just as I finally disengaged the lock, Marshall grabbed my feet. Reflexively, I kicked at him and he backed off. No match for my high-action feet, I heaved at the sliding door until it slid open enough for me to squeeze through. The outside air blew onto my face. I would be saved. But just then I sensed the grand piano above me being moved. Marshall heaved at the massive instrument until he had rolled it aside and completely exposed me. Desperately, I pushed myself through the half-open door, but not fast enough. Marshall was on top of me again. He was swinging wildly, and the dagger hissed through the air in front of my face. I grabbed his wrist to keep the knife away from me, but I lost my grip for just one instant and felt the blade slice into my shoulder. I grabbed onto his wrist again. There was no pain, not yet. The blade was so sharp it had performed its job mercifully. Without tearing the flesh, I heard myself think with absurd calmness, "He is killing me." But I wasn't about to go down without calling once more on my Slavic legacy, my super strong legs from my crouch. I focused everything that was still alive in me down into my thighs and knees. I coiled my whole body up even tighter, compressing every cell that had the potential for movement, and then released it all in one atomic push against the floor. I sprang up like a killer whale breaching high out of the water. Marshal Zander was thrown back onto the piano, which gave me enough time to stumble out onto the balcony. The rush of cool night air felt good in my body, except for the sparkle of city lights far below. It was dark out there, but in that darkness was my safety. I prayed that the renovations on the balcony hadn't progressed far enough to have the lights connected yet. I hobbled my way cautiously toward a large potted tree silhouetted amidst the rubble of marble slabs and brass railings scattered about the balcony surface. I had at least a slim hope of surviving out here, for I had recalled Marshal Zander's fear of heights. Chances were he wouldn't follow me outside, especially in the darkness. Trouble was, how would I summon help? Semaphore signals? I could stay out on the balcony and bleed to death, or I could go back inside and get my throat slashed. Some choice. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to have the choice, for Marshall was now standing in the doorway that opened onto the balcony. "I know you're out there," he said. "I can smell your blood." Like any good predator, he knew he had wounded me, and he recognized his clear advantage despite his phobia. "All I have to do is follow your trail." The pool of blood was strong, yet his voice sounded a bit uncertain. Was his fear beginning to paralyze him, or was I hoping for a miracle? "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't want it to turn out this way. I just wanted to feel your body. I'm not a killer. Everything just went wrong. It wasn't supposed to be like this." He made his way slowly toward where I was hiding behind the large concrete urn. He kept his body crouched down close to the floor of the balcony, as though that would protect him from falling to the ground. 45 stories. He crept like a crab, with one hand always holding on to something to steady his shaky footing. I saw another potted tree further away from him, and next to the railing, right at the balcony's edge. It would take a measure of courage that I prayed he didn't have for him to follow me that close to the edge of the building. I set off towards that tree, but my fanny failed me. The big push I'd given to my legs to get Marshal Zander off my back had sent more blood into those muscles, and now That same blood had dripped and splattered onto the polished marble slabs scattered about the balcony. My attempted scurry to safety became a kind of limp and drag movement, a signal of easy prey. Marshall saw me making for the edge of the balcony. "Get back from there," he said. "It's dangerous." "For who?" I said, forgetting in the urgency of the moment the only rule of grammar I ever knew. He changed his direction and headed toward me. I dragged myself toward the big urn near the edge, but I wasn't going to make it. I saw him stand up and come at me. Still brandishing the knife, I pulled myself up and staggered toward the balcony railing. I felt the blood almost streaming off me now. He lunged at me, and I swooned and fell to the side. And then I heard the sounds, 3 of them, one right after the other, all within a half-second. The first was a sliding, slippery sound like the whoosh of a leather sole without traction on a wet marble slab. And the second sound was the high musical clang of English forged steel falling against polished marble. And the third was the heavy fluttering of some huge, desperate object not meant to be airborne. With my one usable arm, I hauled myself up and looked over the railing. Marshall Zandard was falling through space, and I was Fay Ray watching her ardent pursuer plummet from the Empire State Building. The blundering ape shrank to a pathetic monkey, a fitting end for the man who was afraid of heights, yet dared to live in the highest, most spacious penthouse in Boston. Had it been an accident, or was it an intentional leap? Had it really happened? It took me a long time to drag myself back inside. I was still conscious enough to be worried about losing so much blood. That would be the last irony, to die now. I called 911, and they told me that the accident had already been reported and the police were on their way. "I need an ambulance," I said, but they already hung up. I set out for the elevator, but stumbled and fell just before I got there. It seemed as if hours passed. Why wasn't anyone coming to save me? Then I realized I should have called the desk for help. What would that arrogant conserje have to say to me now? Finally, I got into the elevator and back down to the main lobby. I was dripping blood everywhere as I staggered my way through crowds of screaming hotel guests on my way outside. I had to get out to the sidewalk to see what had happened. The police were already out there with their usual chaos of light and sound. One plainclothes cop stood out from all the others in uniform. It was Lieutenant Branco, crouched over Marshall Zander's smashed-up body on the sidewalk. He turned to see me standing there like a battle-bloodied soldier. "I should have guessed," he said. "You told me you'd get him." "I didn't kill him, Lieutenant." "Then who did?" It took all my remaining strength to deliver the line with a straight face. "Beauty, Lieutenant. It was Beauty killed the beast." And then I blacked out. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.